Welcome to the Equine Vet Connect Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Carter. I'm a veterinarian and a farrier. The goal of this podcast is to educate horse people, break things down, bust myths, and keep it real. Speaking of breaking things down, here's my legal disclaimer to keep my attorney and insurance company happy. While I am a vet, I may not be your vet. Contact them before trying anything you hear on this podcast. Remember, just because you watched it on YouTube or heard it on a podcast does not mean you can do it. Please use common sense. All right, welcome back to the Equine Vet Connect Podcast here at Countryside Equine Hospital. A little bit of an interesting episode today. This was actually a question sent in by one of our listeners in Colorado. We'll get into why that's important, but first let me introduce everybody. We've got Dr. Zoe Latimer, we've got Dr. Caroline Brown, and Dr. Caitlin McCauley, and you've got me, Dan Carter. So all four of us are here today because this is an interesting discussion. One of our listeners in Colorado actually sent this question in and wanted to know more about it. So in Colorado, there was a referendum on the ballot called Proposition 129. And 129 creates what we call a mid-level practitioner. They're equating it to a physician's assistant or a PA in human med. And the question became, what are these people? What can they do? What is their training? And how will this affect the care of my animals? So, being this a pretty big topic, we got everybody in. This is something we've read into. Right now, it's only being done in Colorado, but this could potentially spread. And like I said, some of our listeners in Colorado, they wanted to know, like, how will this affect us? So, we decided to take a really close look at this bill. This is something that we've all been watching ever since it came up on the ballot referendum in Colorado. So, let's take a dive in. Dr. Brown, you've probably done the most work. An interesting fact, Dr. Brown's husband is actually a physician's assistant, a neurology PA. So I feel like there's also a lot of knowledge on how this affects. You know, we have a lot of similarities between the human side, and then we're looking at it from the veterinary side today. So why don't you take a deeper dive into what Proposition 129 is?
Yeah. So Proposition 129, or Prop 129 as we'll be calling it, has basically, it states that it is creating a state-regulated profession called a Veterinary Professional Associate, which we'll call a VPA for the rest of this podcast. And so what this means is that the state will have its own laws kind of outlining what this position can do. But the whole purpose of it is that you've created this additional associate that can work alongside of DVMs, which is Doctors of Veterinary Medicine, which is what we all are. They can work aside,
or
VMDs. If you went to Penn, yes.
Yeah, for whatever reason, if you go to Penn, you become a PennWE, or we like to call it veterinary medical doctor.
Veterinary medical doctor. That's yes.
They had to be different.
Mm-hmm. They are synonymous.
Mm-hmm. Yes. They are the same thing. Yes, they are the same thing.
Yes.
So they'll be working alongside those as well as licensed veterinary technicians, veterinary assistants, other specialists in there. So it's just basically creating another position in the realm of veterinary field. And the kind of idea behind this was they wanted to find an answer to the problem of veterinary shortages, which we kind of talked about in some previous episodes.
Right.
How in a lot of parts of the United States, it's just not a lot of veterinary professionals for people to take their animals to. And so this is kind of Colorado's response to that problem and them saying that. And I think what we've all been kind of discussing is how we're like, yes, this is definitely a problem. We're definitely acknowledging that, but as we're looking at the facts here, we're trying to figure out, is this the right decision? Is this the right, answer to it? Or, what are some, consequences that could happen with this legislature?
Mm-hmm. I feel like this, as it went through, I feel like it left a lot of questions. Really more questions than it did answers or solutions. And I felt like a lot of the bill, when it was pushed through, was, we're going to get this passed and then we're going to figure it out later.
Mm-hmm. All the language is very vague. Like the language, if you read through the whole thing, it says will be decided by the state board, will be decided by the state board, but there's no concrete answers to anything. It's just vague language that I think can be very misleading and confusing.
And that was one of the things, the AVMA, or the American Veterinary Medical Association, that was one of their concerns as well. This is a very vague deal, and they have sort of taken the position of we're against this from the outset. But and I think the biggest reason is because of this lack of understanding. One of the things that we're going to get into is talking about the training that's required, but also what they're allowed to do. And when you start comparing what they're allowed to do compared to their training, it does leave a lot of questions to be answered. So
a little bit of clarification backing up. So Dr. Carter was talking about the AVMA is the American Veterinary Medical Association. They're not the ones that's pushing this legislation through. It's the state of Colorado itself has actually pushed this through. So it's not nationwide legislature. It's only state to state currently. So he's talking about currently the national AVMA is not supporting this legislation. They've stated that, but Colorado is pushing this through. So.
It was the voters that voted it in and allowed it to be pushed through.
So let's talk about what does it take to become a VPA? I think we need to dig into that. Let's talk about what it takes to become a VPA. And then let's talk about what they're allowed to do, and then we'll kind of compare and contrast that to, there's already registered veterinary technicians out there. They go under a lot of different titles. And then we'll also compare that to what we as veterinarians are allowed to do in the training behind what was required of us. One of my big concerns, and let's talk about that, is the amount of undergraduate training you have to actually be able to enter this course. If I'm not mistaken, Dr. Brian, you can kind of get into that a little bit about what we're looking at for the undergraduate training.
Right. So basically what the, board has already started to outline is what they want to propose as their recommended prerequisites to get into this program. Because it will be a master's degree. So at the end of this curriculum, you will come out with a master's degree as a veterinary professional assistant. So the prereqs that they talked about were a minimum of 30 credits, and it looks like it spans from, just very basic biology, basic, chemistry, physics, some, kind of just life sciences type classes, a little anatomy, physiology. And it all basically just, it adds up to about 35 to 37 credits that they recommend just as the bare minimum to get in, which I thought was a little confusing at first because, when I had originally read the proposition and it said it was a master's degree, I said, okay, that's going to require that an applicant's going to have, bare minimum an associate's degree or, even a bachelor's degree before you go on and do this. But then once you read it, you're like,
that doesn't add up. I'm like, 30 credits is 2 semesters of school. It's and it's barely scratching the surface. I mean, these are all kind of introductory, life science courses that, a lot of people take in high school. If you took an AP biology, that could probably substitute for some of these courses. So I was like, I found that really interesting at first. I was like, man, that's not a lot.
Certainly to get a master's degree, you would have already had to complete 4 years of college, then get into a master's program, complete at least 2 years of additional schooling to then finish your master's and then write a dissertation, and then you're awarded your master's degree.
Exactly. So that was my initial that was my initial confusion with it. And again, these things that they've said, these are like the bare minimum requirements that they've outlined and said this is what we want for this position. So it doesn't mean that is set in stone what that's going to be, but just reading it, I said, that's it? There's not even organic chemistry on there, which, I mean, we all took organic chemistry at one point, and I can't say that any of us use it on a day-to-day basis, but I feel like it's one of those courses that it's like, if you can pass organic chemistry, it's like, that's kind of your big checkpoint of your...
I think the other thing is, we look at these courses that we had to take, and a lot of us thought, why did I have to take this? Well, if you think about it, how can you understand pharmacology and the drugs you're given if you don't have a basic understanding of organic chemistry?
Exactly.
It's one of those things that without realizing it or not, we're actually using organic chemistry every day. We just don't think about it because it's in a context that isn't straight out of an organic chemistry book.
It's wrapped in a different box.
Right.
But it's the same information.
It's the same principles.
A very basic principle of chelation.
Chelation.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
When you see in your syringe 2 drugs mixing together and it makes
Crystals.
crystallization, chelation.
Organic chemistry in action.
Exactly.
Don't push that drug into the vein. Ooh.
And of all things, like I find it interesting. They focus fairly heavy on math, but let's be real honest here, guys. If you had to say like what class they're going to take as a prerequisite is probably the least helpful, it's math. We have to make the big conversion from mils to cc's, a little stoichiometry.
Sounds to
It's
kids.
all addition, subtraction, multiplication, division.
Algebra, a lot of
You could
algebra.
have a veterinary mathematics course, and that could be it. We
Yeah.
did not need statistics. We did not.
No.
I don't.
You could have a math course designed specifically for veterinarians and complete it and be like, good to go.
You're
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
But I mean, basic biology, chemistry, and organic chemistry, like I said, without that fundamental understanding of that pharmacology and knowing what medication you're giving, because I think a lot of people think that this is a rote memorization game where you see this and you do this, but that's not it at all. You have to think about not only why you're giving a medication, but you also need to have an understanding of the effects of that medication beyond the therapeutic, knowing what else it can do, because that's very important. There's some medications that we would love to use, but has a side effect. I mean, I think about our use of NSAIDs, bute and banamine. Absolutely great. They help relieve pain. They help with reduce inflammation. But at the same time, they can be toxic to the kidneys and the GI tract. And so you've got to have that understanding, so you know, like, yes, I'm doing this, but I also have to be mindful of this could happen.
It's all building blocks. Like as you go through, or as we go through our education, all the way from undergrad all the way up through veterinary school and beyond, as we go to CE, I mean, it's building blocks. You learn anatomy, you learn physiology, you learn body systems, you learn diseases, you learn medications, and everything builds on each other. Like you can't get all the way to the end and be expected to utilize these things and do them well without having all of those steps that you've taken to get up to the top.
Right. And most of us too, I'd say by the time that we got into veterinary school, we had already had, some basic understanding of even anatomy and physiology, because, I think we can all attest to when you get into vet school, like you hit the ground running. Like it's like you already kind of have an understanding of how a lot of these different body systems work and how, metabolism works and all these other, functions. So it's when you're getting in there, you're like, okay, now let's get into like the nitty gritty of it and like really try to understand what this is doing and how this affects, these different disease processes and how it's different in this species versus that species. So
You're expected to have a certain base level of understanding.
Yes.
They're not going back to make sure you understand
No.
how cell biology functions.
No,
You
no.
better understand that.
And certainly you could have a cookbook medicine person, like you could make a cookbook for someone to follow, but they would be doing these things without understanding why they're doing them.
And you're always going to have the outliers that come in and don't read the textbook.
Yeah.
And so then what do? If you don't have the understanding of the anatomy and the physiology and everything that goes into it, I don't understand how you can make that work.
Well, and I think a question for you, Dr. Brown, is, I think about your husband who went to PA school. My understanding is when you finish your prerequisites to go to PA school, you could also apply to medical school. It's the same prerequisites in undergrad.
Absolutely. And I think the difference too with, my husband and a lot of my other good friends that are, physician assistants or nurse practitioners is that they always wanted to be that. They never wanted to be a medical doctor because they're two very different roles. They do a lot of similar things, but like their responsibilities and the job description is actually very different. And there are benefits to doing, being an MD versus being a PA. And, my husband always wanted to be a PA. Like that was always, his end goal. It was never like, oh, I want to go to med school instead. But, with this, I'm like, my question is, who is this targeting? Like who are these people out here that are going to want to do this? Is there a population out there of people that want to be PAs in vet med? Like,
Yeah. We actually haven't outlined it yet. What exactly will these VPAs be allowed to do? We a little bit skipped over that. So we could go kind of skip back and say,
Go back, yeah.
what will these VPAs be allowed to do? Because and the truth is, a lot of it is very vague.
It
the
is.
wording is very vague, but we'll briefly kind of go through what VPAs will be allowed to do so
As
far.
the law reads now, a VPA will actually have the ability, now this could change with state boards, but the VPA actually has the ability to do anything that a licensed veterinarian can do except for USDA accredited work. And a lot of people don't understand, like, so let's just touch briefly on what USDA accredited work. This is paperwork. This is doing federal tests such as the Coggins test. This is also writing interstate and international health certificates. Those are probably the two biggest things that a licensed veterinarian can do that a VPA won't be able to do. So what falls into that realm is they actually have the ability to perform any surgery that we could do. Like, that is okay.
And performing basic work that we need, like Coggins and health certificates, they will not be able to do. I'm like, that's some of the stuff that we need. Like,
And then the thing comes down to, and that was one of the questions I had, is we're charged with protecting animal health across the board. We're looking out for foreign animal diseases. And one of the things when we get into the curriculum, if you really look at it, how much training are they getting in this to where they're going to be able to recognize, hey, this is one of these rare diseases that's not supposed to be here. They just showed up on our doorstep. I need to alert somebody. This becomes very, very important when we're talking about our food supply.
Yep.
Yes.
A lot of people do not realize how critical that role is in recognizing these to our food supply. And people don't think about veterinarians being as involved in our food supply as they are. But if you look at the state of Colorado, very, very large in cattle production. A lot of our food is coming out of Colorado from an animal impact.
And that's a big area where there is a veterinary shortage. I mean, rural areas that do produce a lot of our, production species, food animal species, livestock, that is a huge area of veterinary shortage. And when we look at this curriculum, it's not really addressed. Like, food animal medicine is not really addressed in the curriculum. However, in their clinical competencies, there's a whole list of things that they're supposed to be expected to be competent in or good at. And there's a hole there where I don't know how that's going to be, addressed, how those two things are going to go together. But that is an area where we need help. But they're the first line of defense for, veterinarians are the first line of defense in food animal medicine for recognizing those things, like Dan was saying. So there's just a lot of gaps.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about that. I think one of the concerns I had was when you look at how this training is received and how this program is done, this is going to be a majority online virtual training. And I was going to say, one of the things I want to say is, like, I have a hard time with this, but and this is going to show my age, but when I went to vet school, online was not a thing.
No.
Like, we're still getting, internet was off the ground and flying, but I wouldn't say it was anywhere near where you could, the thought of attending a course virtually didn't exist. Like, we still had paper, and, like, your notes were on paper. And granted, I think I was, like, one of the last classes to go through, but I know some of y'all were COVID.
Yeah, I was a
We
COVID
did.
student, so I went through and, basically we went off for spring break and we never came back. So I had basically half of my veterinary education, like my didactic education, in person, and the other half of it was online. And there's a difference. There's a huge difference between in-person lecture and online lecture. And this isn't for everybody. I mean, I'm sure some people can do great learning online. There's a difference.
Yeah.
Yes, very much.
So I would go and sit in class, and then I would go home and re-listen to the lecture on, like, faster speed. So it's like, yes, you can listen to a lecture. You can watch a PowerPoint. But labs, absolutely not.
Gosh, no.
Heck no.
There's no substitution for being in person, having your teacher there, hands-on. No substitution.
And
hands down.
I think about, I added up when I was in school just to see, because I was just, curious how many hours I'd physically spent in lab. And it was about 550 hours in person. And that didn't include on my own time, like going back to study.
I didn't even want to know the numbers.
Oh, I did. I wanted to know.
And one of the things that you look at on here is when we get into anatomy, The
Do they have an
anatomy
anatomy
portion,
lab?
they do, but it is an online lab.
It's like
There's no such thing as an online lab.
agree.
I know.
There's no
You-
such thing.
You have to get your hands on it and like
a lab,
touch it
A lab
and-
means
yeah.
in person. Otherwise, it's a lecture.
because then you go out and you go out to practice and you have to put your hands on things. That's how a physical exam works. And if you haven't learned the anatomy
How can you
physically,
palpate? How
Yeah.
can you learn to palpate?
I don't
Or what if
know.
you're in surgery and you're opening up this animal for the first time and it's alive on your thing and you've never looked at an abdomen of a dog, like to spay? I mean,
It's very real because I can tell you, we basically spent our afternoons our freshman year in anatomy lab.
Yes.
We're talking
Every day.
about 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. We were in, basically we came back at 1:00 after lunch, and from 1 to 5 was anatomy lab. And that was 2 semesters.
Yep.
yeah.
And I can tell you, I'm not sure I could have done that any faster because
Right.
It's
And
it's
a lot.
grueling and it's
And it
100%
was,
necessary.
Absolutely. It's
there's
the
no
foundation.
substitution for
Yeah.
it. You literally got to get in there and get your hands dirty.
Right.
Because there's no other way.
Right.
There's no substitution for it.
and it's, I mean, and I'm one of those people, I'm like, I can read something on a piece of paper 10 times and it won't sit with me until I've put my hands on it and I've looked at it and touched it. And I feel like if I didn't have that in school, I'm like, I would, by the time I'm out in practice, I'm like, I don't know what to do with my hands.
very
Very
Very visual learner.
yes,
This is an in-person profession.
it is
This
very
is a
much.
See it, touch it, feel it.
Unless they're only going to be
Smell
doing
it.
telemed.
Yeah. Well, and I think that brings up another question is, unfortunately, we get into these programs and we talk about direct versus indirect supervision. And you want to talk about something that I really wish they would lay out better is direct versus indirect supervision.
That's always been
Correct.
vague.
And that's always been a vague rule. And then during COVID, direct supervision took on kind of a life of its own. Because
Yes.
when we added in the virtual, there were exceptions made and there were allowances made that allowed a virtual direct supervision. Meaning, so the way it is in Georgia, direct supervision means that you are physically in person present at the physical location. Indirect means that you are available, that you're available by phone, you can be communicated with. And then based on the task is what requires a direct versus indirect supervision. When virtual came out, in a lot of instances, virtual was allowed to be considered direct supervision. Where if you could get somebody on FaceTime, Skype, whatever, I can't even remember all these new things. Zoom, I don't know. But that could actually count towards virtual, or it could count towards direct supervision. And as we all know, when something comes about, it very seldom goes away. And when you read the legislature, nothing was really changed. It was the board would rule that, hey, we're going to allow this. But it was never rescinded.
Right.
And so it kind of opens up some liabilities for practitioners as well, because we're in charge of supervising these people. They work under our guidance,
Under our license as well.
under our license. We're the ones that carry the insurance. We're the ones that are ultimately responsible for every decision they make. And the question becomes, where is the boundary there?
Right.
Because if you read some of these practice acts and you look at the direct versus indirect supervision, you could literally have one veterinarian that's virtually available for multiple locations, and you have VPAs that are working under that, providing all care. And,
So now it's very easy to see why large companies such as the ASPCA would be huge proponents for something like this, and why they've also allowed them to be able to perform specifically space and neuters.
well, any surgery can be performed.
Right.
In our
They
world,
listed in
technically,
there space and neuter specifically.
That's the
as well.
specific one. But I'm like, how many times did you open up a dog in spay neuter lab and you're like, oh, there's a mass in here or
Things don't look the way they're supposed to, or
it gets more complex. There's so many times when you're in the middle of a procedure and you're like, oh, well, that's not expected.
Yeah.
And how do you navigate that if you've only had a very short amount of time hands on?
Right, no, exactly. But basically, these people will be operating technically underneath a veterinarian's license. They are allowed to basically do surgeries And they don't limit any surgery.
I mean, technically, they could do, in our field, they could do a colic surgery.
Right, and there's no limitation
Yeah.
thus far because it's very big.
They could do
There's
a
no
colic
limit on
surgery, they could do
surgeries.
tiebacks, arthroscopies.
There's the only limit they've put is no USDA accreditation work, which means no Coggins, no health certificates. What else are they allowed to do? They're allowed to do all like vaccines, wellness appointments. They're allowed to do
Euthanasias.
euthanasia. They're allowed to do basically everything a veterinarian can do. Is there anything that they cannot do that you guys read?
They can't dispense, or they cannot prescribe controlled
Controlled
substances,
Controlled
Substances,
substances, yeah.
which is such a small amount. Like,
Right.
I don't know if it's good or bad, but we don't have a lot of controlled substances.
I don't give out a lot of controlled
No,
substances.
not
to
not
begin
not
with.
in our, at least not in our
to-
field.
Not
Like,
to owners.
And I think,
It's very, 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 very few.
and I think it's difficult because we don't want people to think that this is necessarily 100% bad, because I think there's a lot of benefit here.
yes.
I think
There's
what
a
we're
lot of
saying is we
potential
gotta
here.
have some training wheels, we gotta have some guidance, we gotta have some direction, and I feel like this got pushed through without. I feel like we got the cart before the horse.
We
pushed
I feel
something
like-
through without a plan.
We
Yeah.
haven't thought through all the pitfalls yet.
I think a mid-level veterinary position, such as a equivalent to a PA in human medicine, but for a veterinary profession, is a good idea.
Absolutely.
Because we need warm bodies. The truth of it is, we do not have enough people in this profession to service all of the animals in this country. There's huge gaps. There's no doubt. Everybody
Yeah,
knows that.
we all-
we need
yeah.
a solution.
But this ain't it.
Yeah.
Well, and if you look, I think human medicine has done a great job. I've got a very good friend of mine. She's a nurse practitioner, and she's a very good nurse practitioner. She is very good at what she does. However, there's strict guidelines. Like, you get to operate in here,
Yes.
and then the PA, like, you get to operate in here.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what I think what we're asking for is like, hey, we need some
Structure.
guidelines.
I think the idea is correct. I think we need different guidelines.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
think when we look at like licensed veterinary technicians and registered veterinary technicians, their curriculum and their education and training is more extensive than what we have here.
Absolutely.
And I think that if we could make this mid-level practitioner a position where those people that have that background, that training, that hands-on experience, they can go into this role. Give them another step up on the elevator that they can progress in their career field.
Basically take this as make a veterinary technician be able to transition into this position.
Exactly.
When you look at RVTs or LVTs, they've got registered veterinary technician, licensed veterinary technician. I think some states even use the term veterinary nurse. That one's, I don't like using that because there have been a few lawsuits over that term, but I don't want to get bogged. I'm getting bogged down in nomenclature. But we have several RVTs here, and when you talk to them and you learn about the training and the coursework they've been through, it's quite intensive.
Yes.
It's 2 years where they're in class, in person, 8 hours a day. They have to come out and do these externships in the field. And then they have a next step, which is called a specialist. They can specialize. That requires 3 to 5 years experience.
Yes, it does.
As it should.
So that-
And you're
As it
already
should.
registered and been working and licensed
Yeah.
and
Right.
everything, so you already have that foundation because I'm not as familiar with these license programs, but like they already have a basic understanding of biology and pharmacology and all these things. Like they understand, they can read lab work.
Yeah.
Like
Well, if you
I had
look-
techs in vet school that like they were telling me what to do when I was a student.
And that's what I was gonna say is I think that every veterinarian, as you've gone through, you've hopefully had these experience with these technicians that are very educated and are very experienced, and they are a wealth of knowledge.
Yes.
Like technicians, as
100%.
I've gone through, have taught me so many things. Maybe not in the like foundational clinical aspects of things, but just like the tips and tricks to get you through, like that you need to learn for your technical skills and. Just they're a wealth of knowledge, and I think that we could better utilize them. And I just
I
think
mean, there's no doubt we could not do our jobs without them.
No.
And they, yeah.
And I look like, I guess what concerns me is you have that veterinary technician who is, and most of those programs require 2 years of undergraduate, which
Yes.
is basically the same here. And then another 2 years of tech school.
Yep.
They do come out with an associate's. I do feel like maybe we ought to really look at that program. I think it should be more than just an associate.
Yeah, for real.
And I want to be clear about this. When we talk about this, letters behind your name do not make you better.
Oh, gosh, no.
We all know vets that have got plenty of letters behind their name that we're like, not so good. No difference than like you got MDs out there. Everybody's like, yeah, maybe not. So letters don't make you bulletproof.
No.
It's your skill level.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing I think about is the disservice we may be doing, because you have this registered veterinary technician that finishes all this, and then they go on and complete a specialty, which is a very intensive program. I've had some techs over the years that have completed specialty training, and I look at what they went through to complete that, and yet they still cannot perform anywhere near the task that this VPA is allowed to perform.
Yeah.
And the other thing I do get concerned about is not just, we look at things as like what's best for the animal, because that's what we took an oath. We're called to serve in that area. But also look at the people that are completing this program, and then you're just kind of turning them out. Are we setting these people up for failure?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's a big concern I have, is are we setting these VPAs up, looking at what they're required for training? Are we setting them up for failure?
Yeah. Well, and because we haven't really, the curriculum it's 4 semesters online, or no, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
4 semesters online.
Yeah. And then they have a semester in person. That's kind of like a capstone externship kind of thing. But that's it. I mean, it's 66 total credit hours. We compare that to, our veterinary training, which is at least 150.
Right.
Yeah.
So more than double.
Yeah.
But yet they're allowed to do, or proposed to be allowed to do,
Basically
everything that we do.
Well, and I think that's, if you really want to dig down in the crux of it, is they're doing less training, but are allowed to do everything a veterinarian's allowed to do. And I think that's our concern. If there was like, hey, here's some limitations, I think 100% is a great idea. But without those limitations, and we're basically saying these people have the clinical competency, and they're going to be legally able to perform every task that a veterinarian does, we're just going to do it with far less training. And I can remember now, and y'all probably had even more. I mean, 15 years ago when I graduated, like I said, you're 150 hours deep in training before you hit the clinic floor.
Yeah.
I felt like I was drinking from a fire hose, and I can still tell you, I felt like I got another, when I did my internship, I felt like I all of a sudden got another 150 hours in training.
Oh yeah, easily.
Because I remember when I learned to fly, the instructor or the examiner that signed off and said, hey, you have a license. Since we got on the ground, he said, yes, you have a pilot's license, but really what I gave you is a license to learn.
Yeah.
You're going to learn every day. And so I think about that, and I'm looking like, are we giving them the license to go learn? Are we giving them the basic skills that they need to truly go learn and develop themselves as these mid-level practitioners?
Well, and one of the most important things too is, are we sacrificing quality of care to the patients?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest worry. I think that's across the board what everybody's the most worried about is
Yes, every animal deserves care and deserves to be seen, but I think they also deserve quality of care, and they deserve,
not the oopsies.
Yeah.
Right.
yeah, because there's a line in here about recognize case complexity for appropriate referral to a DVM. And so if you don't have the background and you don't know, you might get down in the weeds and it might be too late. It might be,
What if you have somebody that's a little arrogant and they don't want to admit that the case is too big for them and that they need a DVM?
Yeah, I think a big thing that we're discussing and that we want to make sure of is that we have a quality of patient care. And I think that's the biggest thing we want to make sure that does get addressed in this, is we don't want to sacrifice quality for quantity. And we all agree, yes, there's shortage, and I think there's a lot of value in a mid-level practitioner.
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of things that we may see initially that we can say, okay, we're going to pass this off, or to have that person that's here overnight, that's a mid-level practitioner, to have someone that's helping us under direct guidance, like I'm talking like sight distance, that can help us through these things, which I think there's a lot of value to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, or maybe
you've seen the doctor already, and the doctor's evaluated your case and said, hey, I think you can come back for a recheck, but you can come back and see my mid-level practitioner because, you don't need to see me anymore. We have this under control. You can do the recheck with the
Then appropriate
PA,
guidance can be put in when you do the medical record. You can say like, okay, I want it between these parameters. If not, I need to know.
Right.
If it's not doing this, then I need to know.
Well, and that's how a mid-level works. I mean, a doctor technically has to sign off on what the mid-level's plan is before it gets officially done.
But I think if we start with the mid-level and the doctor's not directly involved in that case from the beginning, like, it can get lost in translation. It can get lost in kind of the shuffle. So I feel like if we start at the top, like we're saying, start with the doctor at the top and then trickle down, like I think this could be really helpful. I just think it needs to be done appropriately.
Absolutely.
I think we've painted with too broad of the only criticism I have is I don't think the training is adequate, but
Correct.
then I also feel like we're painting with too big of a brush. I think there needs to be some limitation.
There's too much expected of them or allowed for them to do with too little training.
I think they're going to get tangled in their own rope.
Well, and I just worry at the end of the day, it's the patient that suffers.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
I think done appropriately, this can be wildly beneficial for patient care. I think it could be.
I think this is the future of veterinary medicine. I think there's no doubt about it. I think this will be a thing in the next 5 years. There will be VPAs that exist. I just think that we need stricter guidelines. I think they need more training. I think we need way more, like, they can do this, they cannot do this, they like.
And I think there needs to be more strict things on like licensing and liability and all of those things, like to allow them to do all of these things with the veterinarian's license at risk. I think it's a disservice to the animals and it's a disservice to the profession, in my opinion.
I think they should more closely model it after like a PA in a doctor
nurse
setting.
practitioners, that sort of role, because and I've seen some PAs and nurse practitioners over the years that were absolutely fantastic.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely love.
But they have strict guidelines,
Right.
and they are trained to the nines. I mean, they go through rigorous schooling to get there.
Like I said, just to apply to the program, Thor had the option, like,
To go to med school.
Could have gone to med school.
PA school.
Yeah.
And then when you start looking at the PA training, it's a pretty intensive.
It's pretty
program.
intense. It is. I was kind of surprised when I learned the details of it. I was like, oh my god, I thought vet school was hard. I was like,
for real.
dang.
Well, and then when our friend that's a nurse practitioner, when I saw what she went through, like completed nursing school, and then went on for that next program, which I think is a lot of. If you think about it, the nurse practitioner route, I think, would be a great route to develop a VPA. Using the RVT program.
Absolutely,
you've completed this program, and now we've got this additional training on top of that. And in talking, like I said, my friend that's the nurse practitioner, when I start hearing about what they went through, I swear, and I think in good purpose, I think they were harder on them than they were on us in vet school, and even the doctors. But I think the purpose behind that is, hey, we're giving you this course, we're giving you this. We're going to make sure that you are ready.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a very intense program. But again, she has got guidelines and they are well defined. I can do this, but I can't do this. Like she's one, like she works in pediatrics, takes care of our kids. And it's very clear what she can and can't do.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said also for, you have to know enough to know that you don't know.
Right.
Yes.
Like you have to know, you have to have a breadth of knowledge to be like, it could be all of these things, but it still doesn't add up. It's not fitting this picture and I don't know, and I need help. I need to pass it off to somebody. And I think that takes a lot of knowledge. And so I feel like
And humility too.
Yeah.
I mean, like I think one of the hardest things we do is admitting that you're like, I don't know what this is.
Admitting you're in over your head.
Yes.
And being like, yes, I need to phone a friend.
Because it's so I feel like it is so rare that we have these very straightforward, like, textbook cases.
Yeah,
that, like,
never. And I'm so thankful for those sometimes. I'm like, oh, thank you.
Yes.
I'm like, you read the book, you did exactly what I need you
Yeah,
to
it's like
do.
great,
Thank
like
you.
clinical exam
It never
matches the
happens.
blood work, which matches the laboratory test.
Yes.
And you're like, I
It
never
matches
get
the
this.
imaging,
It never
and you're like,
happens.
holy crap, you're the one.
I had a student with me yesterday, and it was so funny because a lot of the cases that we were seeing did actually kind of like follow the textbook of things, and I was like, so this is not what it's like most of the time. I'm like, this is so rare that like this happens to me, because most of the time I do these things and they do not actually end up happening like that.
Most
Like,
of the time, we're just wilding.
we're just kind of wilding out here, but I was like, you know what, like this is good to see
Yeah.
that, and it was a little you know, it was
But
nice for me too.
You're a good warm up. You know, you're like here's some softballs.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, because in my head, I'm like, oh my God, what could this be? Like, I'm running through everything, and I was like, oh, look, it's blocked out, and it's an abscess.
Yeah.
But, wow. I was like,
Blocks to a PD. The horse is actually tying up. The horse is actually colicking. Simple gas
amazing.
colic. Like,
Amazing. I was like, oh, this
a
is
simple eyeball. Like
right. And I was like, wow, but this never happens.
Yeah.
Like, it's so rare that something like this happens.
But we have the knowledge and the training and the experience to be able to navigate those things. And I just, yeah.
You know, I often think about, you know, some of the surgeries I do, it's like, when I'm doing them, it's not about knowing how to do the surgery, it's knowing how to do the surgery when something goes wrong,
Right.
or how to do the surgery when something doesn't follow the textbook.
Because
I can tell you,
inevitably,
I've been in a lot of joints, and you're in there, and you're like, well, you're not supposed to be there. That's not supposed to be there. And it's having that knowledge to be like, okay, well, now where we go from there.
yeah, it's
And
doing a routine spay is theoretically very simple. However, what happens when you get in there and there's a giant splenic mass? What happens when you get in there and things start bleeding?
the dog's pregnant and you didn't know.
Yeah.
Or it's really in heat.
Yep.
And blood is coming from everywhere and you don't know what's going on, and you need to extend your incision in both directions, and now you're just like wildly in over your
now-
head.
Or
Now
you
we're
drop a
jumping in.
pedicle and you don't know where it is. Like,
Yeah.
well, now you're jumping into, you do have that pedicle disease, you know, that dog is bleeding, and now we got to jump from, okay, not only am I in the middle of surgery, now I got to start basic life support.
to
You
keep
know,
this
at
thing
what
stable.
point do I need to get a transfusion going? And I think that's where,
Let me get my virtual doctor
Right,
on
if you-
Zoom real quick.
you know, and I'm hoping Colorado does this well, because if that doctor's there, they can be quickly gotten, they can step in,
Yeah.
and you know, now we can start moving forward. But and I think really, if we were to summarize this, do we think this is the future? Do we think it's a great idea? Do we think I guess if I'd say, do we think the thoughts or the heart of this is in the right direction? Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think
absolutely.
the goals are potentially good. I think they have
Yeah.
good goals.
The question is how's this going to be implemented?
I think it's inevitable. I
Yeah.
think this is the future, whether we like it or not. And I think we do need a mid-level practitioner. I think it's a great idea. And I've actually talked about this before with some other of my like vet friends, you know, and when we were in school, you know, we were like talking about, oh, what if we had PAs in vet med, you know, just to do like basic like snotty nose, or you know, like simple wellness appointments that are like on healthy patients, you know, just to kind of help with volume.
or just to be able to assist us with some of the patients where
Yeah.
it's like we need to come in and lay a plan out, and we need someone to actually go execute on that.
Right, to help with like basic like wound care. Like we have a long-term patient here that needs like bandage changing and simple stuff like that. But like, you know, just to have somebody kind of carry out those tasks for the hospital patients, and kind of report back to the doctor. It would be so helpful.
Yeah,
So I think the idea of it is wonderful, and I do think it is absolutely the future.
Spirit of the program. That's the word. I'm
Yes.
looking for. I think the spirit is very good.
Yeah.
Like,
And I
I
guess
think-
what we're counting on Colorado is we're counting on y'all to do this well and do this right.
Yeah.
And
They're going to be the test dummies,
and
and
I think
we'll see if it flops. I don't know.
yeah, to our listeners in Colorado, you know, we hope this really works out. You know, it's going to be seen as one thing, one way or the other, and we hope it's seen as a success. And there's going to be learning curves to this. And,
Right.
and I do
Anytime
want
you do
to.
something for the first time, there's huge
Right.
learning curves,
Yeah.
no matter what. I mean,
And I think that's
it kind of Colorado. y'all are taking on a big responsibility.
Gotta
Being the
be.
first
It is,
ones,
right,
y'all are blazing
right.
a new trail, and I'm like I feel for you, because anytime anybody does anything for the
Yes.
first time, it's not pretty.
No.
Yeah.
So y'all are taking one for the team. We appreciate y'all. Like,
And I think for owners too, be the advocate for your animal too.
Absolutely.
Like if something is telling you in your gut that you're like, something doesn't seem right, be your animal's advocate. Like I'm always the one, I'm like, I don't like to throw other providers under the bus, because I think we're all out here just like trying our best.
Yeah.
But like at the end of the day, this is your animal and you know them best. And if you don't think that something is right, do what you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like speak
say
up.
something.
Yes, say something, please.
and
Like
say, I don't really like that.
Yeah.
Or I don't think that's right. Or
yeah,
this isn't going well.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Like
So, I guess to kind of wrap things up here, the spirit of this is great. I think there's a lot of work to be done, not just on the technical training aspect, but also on the implementation of this.
Just the guidelines of it.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done. I want to thank everybody for being here. Like I said, this is our first time we've done a podcast with all four of us. But when we first got these questions about this program, and people were wanting questions answered, we sat down and we started discussing it, and we made the decision. We thought this needed to be more than just two people, and so we all committed to come in and to go through this and to read through these and truly get an understanding. And there's been a lot of time into researching this. So I want to thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank our listeners. And again, y'all keep sending in these great questions, because this is a little off topic from what we normally do.
Yeah.
But we did feel like it was a good question that needed to be talked about and discussed. And like I said, keep sending in your questions. We want to keep doing our best to get them answered. And thank everybody for being here today.
yeah.